Welcome to the SVG-TV news for today, June 8th. I am Khalil Kato with the details. SVG on Sunday, June 7th, recorded one more new COVID-19 case following the receipt of 172 PCR results from the Caribbean Public Health Agency, CARPHA. A total of 27 COVID-19 cases have now been recorded in SVG. A release from the National Emergency Management Organization, NEMO, said the new positive case is a RCCL crew member who arrived in the state on Tuesday, May 26th, and previously tested negative on the COVID-19 PCR test done on arrival. The release said the Vicentia national, who was on mandatory quarantine, will now be isolated for a further 14 days. Negative results for COVID-19 PCR tests prior to release from quarantine for 132 RCCL crew members were also received, clearing the way for persons to complete their quarantine on Monday, June 8th. There are still 226 RCCL crew members awaiting a second PCR test result in order to be released from quarantine. The requirement for a second PCR test before the completion of quarantine is part of the revised repatriation protocols for groups deemed to be of a higher risk for being exposed to the SARS-CoV-2 virus. The most recent results also revealed that none of the 34 persons repatriated from the United Kingdom on Wednesday, June 3rd, were positive for COVID-19. These persons will all continue mandatory quarantine for a period of 14 days in private and public government-approved facilities. There is one new recovery, bringing to 16 the number of persons who have recovered from COVID-19 in SVG. The 11 active cases are all in isolation. The Health Services Subcommittee of the National Emergency Committee urges all Vincentians to remain vigilant and to support all returning nationals in their strict quarantine compliance with quarantine and isolation. The public is reminded that persons are placed in quarantine for stipulated periods because of their ongoing risk of being COVID-19 positive, despite having a previous negative COVID-19 result. A large crowd gathered at the Ashton Harcourt in Union Island on Sunday afternoon to say goodbye to two beloved students who died days after sustaining second and third degree burns in an explosion at Freddy's gas station on May 19th. Larissa Pugsley Kidd was there and tells us more in this report.
You were gone before we knew it, and only God knows why.
Hundreds of persons came together on Union Island in the southern Grenadines on Sunday afternoon for the funeral of 15-year-old Lindani Nevison and 17-year-old Gunika Zara Alexander, two of the three fire victims of the gas station fire on May 19, 2020. The third victim, the owner of the gas station, Freddie Nerd, was laid to rest last Wednesday. At Saunders' funeral service at the Ashton Harcourt, persons were given a better understanding of what transpired on the evening of the fire and more about the two beloved students who tragically lost their lives days after the fire. The eulogy for Lindani Nevison was read by his cousin Abden White, who described the 15-year-old as a very special child who was caring and free-spirited like 17-year-old Zara, who also lost her life as a result of the fire.
On the night of his fatal accident, all Lindani was trying to do was help. Him and Zara went to alert Freddie that the tank was running over. Then they followed him behind and we all knew what happened next. Even while he was on fire, he was still running after his dear friend to try to help. And that showed how brave and selfless he was. At the time, I was with his father and others trying to get the fire under control. His father was unaware that his son was injured, and I was too afraid to tell him. He later found out, but it was only after the fire was under control. He said, "Abdul, I'm coming back. I'm going to look for Lindani."
White reflected on Nevison's last days in hospital, which he said were crucial moments.
Lindani prayed every day for his life while he was in the hospital, right to the end. When he lost faith, his mother would say to him, "Keep praying." Once he said, "Mommy, I keep praying and nothing is happening." She responded to him, "Keep praying." So he prayed. The night before he died, the nurse recounted to his mother how he placed his hands in the air and he prayed all night. I have not had a chance to fully understand. It brought us great comfort to know that he died with Christ and having touched so many lives along the way.
There were a number of tributes paid to both students who impacted lives in their own way, even though they were just teenagers. Former principal of Union Island, Vernat Oliver, did the eulogy for Gwanika Zara Alexander, describing her as an outgoing, jovial, and a determined person who did not subscribe to the norms of society, especially for a female.
She worked on the vans and secured freight from the ferries, lifting boxes and wheeling carts like any boy, and was better at it than most. Also, she never played dolly house, but insisted on pitching marbles with the boys, and even went to the park in the afternoons to sweat it out with the guys. She also had the courage and the determination to stick to her definition of herself against all odds. Of note, Zara chose her own name. She reminded everyone that her name was not Gwanika, but Zara.
I'm very proud of my sister. My sister grew up in a home where she was loved, and I can repeat that again.
Education officials, including the Permanent Secretary, Chief Education Officer and Parliamentary Secretary, Deborah Charles, attended the funeral. Charles said the government has stepped in to provide counseling for those who may need it in light of the tragedy.
Island, and we promise that we will have counselors here on the island. We do have counselors that we brought with us, and we are extending these counselors to give you additional support during this time of grief.
Also in attendance at the funeral were Leader of the Opposition and MP for the Northern Grenadines, Dr. Godwin Friday, other opposition members of Parliament and Director of Grenadine Affairs, Edwin Snag. Following the funeral service, the procession headed to Clifton, where the burial for the two youngsters took place. At the gas station where the fire took place, the front remained intact. However, the back of it was completely destroyed. Even the supporting wall collapsed, while trees nearby scorched. A nearby shop, Roots Connection, was also destroyed. The SVG Fire Service said the fire remains under investigation. For SVG-TV News, Larissa Pogsdickid.
And Director of Grenadine Affairs, Edwin Snag, said it is a sad time for Union Island and appeals to residents to rethink the way they do things generally. He said the tragedy of the fire should be a wake-up call for all.
And I want to urge my community as a whole that we take this as a lesson. That there's many things that we can learn from this particular experience. We are indeed all saddened. This is a small community, 4.5 square miles. There's a question of a lot of intertwining within families and of that nature. So this sadness goes across the board. I just wish we learn from this experience. Who was buried last Wednesday, of course, is a 72-year-old man, regardless of. But we looking here and we're talking about two youngsters here, still in the teenage years, and of course that's extremely a sad one for all of us.
Leader of the Opposition, Dr. Godwin Friday, also made a similar appeal, noting the impact the tragedy had on lives in and outside of Union Island.
Easy it is for something that we don't think about to turn into a tragedy, because look at how this, when I'm looking at the background here of the scene, I could imagine what it was like on the evening of the 19th when the explosion took place and the fire was engulfing the place and you didn't know how far it was going to spread, and then to know that 3 persons were seriously injured.
Sean Nero, better known as Old Dog of Camden Park, lost his life in a tragic vehicular accident on Saturday, June 6th. His fiancée, Suzanne Sampson, told our news team that Nero came home very late that night from a party and went back out on the road in his Jeep. Sampson said moments after he left, she heard a very loud noise and ran outside, where she saw her fiancé's Jeep smashed into a utility pole with him lying under the vehicle.
I came outside and I looked, I didn't saw anything. The rain was coming at the same time, then I went inside and get an umbrella and look out. Then I saw the Jeep turning upside down and nobody was there. It was me alone on the street, so I run down and I went looking, I didn't saw anybody. Then I looked under the Jeep, one of his hands was hanging out. And then I, like helpless, lifeless, he was there. I tried pulling his hand, pushing the Jeep. Well, you know, I cannot do anything. I came up, started screaming like crazy. And then I called the neighbors get alerted and everyone came helping. At first they couldn't do anything because the Jeep was too heavy on him. They went and get ropes, pulling him with vehicle that was to no avail, and then they get some logs and raise the Jeep, and then that's when they get him out.
Sampson said her fiancé was a very friendly man who will be greatly missed.
Always happy, the life of the party. Everyone could tell you that. As soon as he reached the party, he don't stick. He started dancing from the time he entered until the party is done. Friendly, a lot of friends, kind. That's what I know him. I will miss him a lot because it was like me and him all the time. We go to parties together, we do videos together, love taking pics together. And now, well, but he was really a person full of life, happy. Always know how to, the villagers can testify that they will wake him off his bed to come and have party with them. He will get up, put on the music, and they will have the parties. It have the wet fet that's circulated on Facebook. That's when they wake him off his bed, and then they just plug up the hose, and they have the wet fet right here.
On the night of the accident, neighbors and friends rushed to Nero's assistance, but unfortunately he succumbed to his injuries sustained in the accident. In Camden Park today, some of his friends described him as a very good man.
Saturday night I hear a big tumbling because I've been watching some Western movie, and it really happened. I see my children run out and say, I said, where are you going? What is nice? He say, they hear people about more, that's why I run out. When I run out, I see the thing across the road down there, and everybody trying to raise it up, but it was too heavy. So I run back home in my pajamas. For 2 pieces of wood, the wood is still in the yard there. And we prize and prize and prize. Somebody had bring a next piece of wood, and so one leg was up and one leg was done with the 2 hands.
One old dog, good friend. The night when the thing happened after 11, my daughter wake me up and say, Mommy, something turned over. So I said, where you going? He said, Mommy, may come back. So I say, okay, when she come back, Mommy, old dog dead. So I come out. When I come out, my father come out too. So when we didn't know her old dog, ex-wife say, oh God, he dead. We say, no, he not dead. Then when we look, we see him underneath the vehicle pin under.
Yeah, so me there so, and like last time I go to my bridge, you know, like on the Friday, Mr. come out there by shave head, me here let him together. And then that time, well, you want to go phone up on a Sunday, whichever Sunday was yesterday, Sunday for our union. And me not really know. It's like we come out, no one, everybody has shank one, we let him together, and you know what I mean? The brother, they bought it, and it's so tragic. Because we there, and like come and watch everybody watch me too. I just attack, and the man just make a spin on the Jeep, come back, bam.
Revenues for the month of May are expected to be further reduced by 20% as the country continues to be affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. So says Prime Minister Dr. Ralph Gonsalves on WeFM on Sunday.
Went down marginally by actually $1.25 million compared to April last year. And January to March, we had a good January to March, and really the year had looked quite good. Our revenues improved by 9% between January to March, the end of March. And then the preliminary numbers, and I'm putting this with great caution, looks as though April would probably be down by in excess of 20%. But the last time, when they'd given the numbers, they had made an error on the VAT numbers. So this is why when the corrected numbers came, it showed
April or May, Prime Minister? April or May would be down by 20%.
May. But as you know, we have what we have done. We have tried to structure several things.
In spite of the fall in revenue, Prime Minister Gonzalez gave the assurance this will not affect the payment of salaries for the month of June, which amounts to 30 million EC dollars, while pointing out the difficulties other islands are facing.
We paid it a couple of days early. We paid it the same thing in May, a couple of days early. I don't see that we're going to have the problem in June. You know already there's some governments which have postponed salaries and talking about paying half in bonds and half in cash. You know that's happening, and there's some countries who went out early o'clock and said no. They said we're locking down completely, locking down tight like a drum. Now saying they're opening back up without any test at all.
The Prime Minister noted that financial assistance has been secured from international agencies, and persons benefiting from the government's COVID-19 stimulus package need not worry.
6 months with our monies at the Bank of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. They don't negotiate that in relation to other people, but with individuals, but with ourselves too. Then we made the application. Well, we were having the discussion before we made the application with the IMF and also with the World Bank. And what is interesting for the World Bank, well, the IMF, we got $41 million. That is for, you see, that's for a 15-year loan, 0% interest.
Food security would be a great challenge for this year's hurricane season. So says Director of the National Emergency Management Organization, NEMO, Michelle Forbes, who was a panelist on SVG-TV's Viewpoint program last evening. Forbes encouraged persons to start to store up at least 2 to 3 weeks' supply of non-perishable items, noting that the COVID-19 pandemic has interrupted the food supply chain for many countries in the region.
At least 2 to 3 weeks supplies of food. Supply of food and non-perishable items. While we do not store food in bulk, we get enough just before an event or just before the hurricane season to have some to tide us over for a few days or a few weeks. But what has happened this year in Chad is that our supply chain has totally been disrupted. And we have entered into hurricane season where that has been a total disruption in our supply chain. So we have been able to have supplies for the COVID-19 response. We are still able to have food supplies coming in, but it's going to be a regional challenge in terms of having that excess that we may have had in previous years. So that's clear. That's across the region. So we have already identified those gaps that if we think that we are running short, what we normally do, we talk to the Red Cross, we talk to SEDEMA, and we identify our gaps right away.
Director of Forestry Fitzgerald Providence said SVG's food security plan was also affected by the drought conditions. He used the opportunity to encourage persons to have their water storage set up, noting that there can be water shortage in the hurricane season.
But as we come into the season, we want to make sure we have enough supplies there that if anything happens, we can be able to respond to the different issues. In terms of security, in terms of food, well, I can speak a little bit in terms of the Ministry of Agriculture, and responding to the COVID. There's a food security plan put in place, being worked on to ensure that there's food. But then, we had the drought season, which would have affected some of the production. But I think we must always realize that, especially during these times, where supplies of food coming in can be cut off, that we must be secure internally in our island in terms of being able to prepare for that. Also water security. And we read in the newspaper and heard in terms of the CEO encouraging us to have our stores in terms of that, because when the storms come and the trees, there will be damage to pipelines, there are different things that can happen that can have.
Operations Manager at the SVG Red Cross, Julia Simmons, said that they have been training persons across the country in disaster management. However, for this year, they have been unable to conduct physical training due to COVID-19 guidelines.
Is our volunteers. And we have numerous volunteers in just about every community in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. They would have been trained in water and sanitation, logistics, various type of training, and they are our greatest resource in terms of their response. We do have preposition supplies, but the fact that we constantly train our volunteers, especially because of COVID, we have ramped up our training. We have included them in a number of refresher courses, and while you can't do the in-house training, a lot of virtual training have been done. So even while NEMA is coordinating, and if a particular community is affected, the volunteers will be asked to do work and to respond to whatever the needs are, especially from the vantage points where NEMA has assessed what are the needs.
Some 40,000 tree crops will be distributed to farmers across the country during this year. This is part of the Ministry of Agriculture's citrus replanting initiative. The ministry says citrus production in SVG has declined in recent times due to the presence of the citrus greening or Huanglong Bing disease, first detected in 2010 in the Grenadine island of Canouan, and from there, the ministry says it spread throughout mainland St. Vincent. The Ministry of Agriculture says a number of interventions were made, including the importation of the natural enemies of the citrus phyllid from Florida to suppress the population of the vector, and the construction of a new propagation greenhouse with new varieties imported under the Japan Caribbean Climate Change Project. Currently, the ministry said there are about 1,000 grafted citrus plants along with some rough lemon rootstocks that are also in demand that are available to farmers, and that the distribution of these plants will commence tomorrow, Tuesday, June 9th. The ministry also gave the assurance that resources will be allocated to increase the production of these plants over the next 12 months. St. Vincent and the Grenadines has recorded the most fires and in some cases the most uncontrollable in decades for the first half of this year. So says Fire Chief Superintendent Joel James.
And we have responded to 106 fires up to last evening. 106 fires for this first part of the year is the most fires we have responded to in decades. We have responded to 26 house fires as well. So that is just to show you the kind of burden, the kind of strain which is put on our fire department unnecessarily.
Superintendent James said this year was the most challenging year ever for the fire department, especially with the drought conditions which have affected the water supply in the country, making it difficult to fill up fire trucks.
Of the low level of water in our water catchment, we are unable to extinguish these fires at the rate we would really want to. Because when you respond to a hydrant, for example, the water is very low to replenish our fire trucks. Very, very low. Some of the hydrants don't even have water because there is a ration system which is going on right now. Some persons would be out of water for a period during the daytime and during the night time.
The fire chief said that the fire department has went to schools and business places educating persons about fires, noting that children were found to be some of the culprits for some of the bushfires.
And we have gone into schools, a number of business houses. We have appealed to children in schools, and what we have noticed in recent times, children are also involved in setting fires to dry areas. I know at Walilabu, just beyond Barley, a child of tender age would have set an area, a cultivated area with 26 orange trees which are bearing, and all of these orange trees were burnt. So we are appealing to parents. Talk to your children. Let them know the seriousness